One of the best loved artists in this country of ours, Nellie Small.
I look in your eyes and I realize it's the end of the affair.
That's the voice of Nellie Small, who throughout the 1940s, 50s and 60s was a huge cabaret star right across Australia and New Zealand, and who kept audiences enthralled with her growling voice full of honey, nutmeg and cinnamon.
And love was born and had its day. The love we thought was here to stay.
Welcome to Caribbean Echoes, a UTS Impact Studios History Lab series about Caribbean people in Australia. My name's Sienna Brown. I'm a Caribbean Australian writer who was born in Kingston, Jamaica and lived in Canada before moving to Sydney. In Canada, there's a whole heap of us Caribbean people, but I soon discovered that here in Australia, it's very different. We're always on the edges, trying to establish ourselves while retaining our own very distinct culture. We can often find it harder than larger migrant groups to forge a place in the Australian story. And with my family living on the other side of the world, this feeling of isolation sent me back again and again into Australia's past to unearth life stories of some of the Caribbean men and women who arrived long before I did. Some were famous in their lifetimes, others were everyday people, but they've all contributed to Australia's cultural fabric. In the first episode of Caribbean Echoes, we investigated the life of Peter Jackson, the black heavyweight boxer born in St. Croix, who in the final decades of the 19th century was a huge figure in Australian sport. In the second episode, we looked at historical connections between Caribbean and First Nations boxing and politics. In this episode, we switch from sports to arts and move into the 20th century to explore the life of Nellie Small, another unique Caribbean Australian. 70 years ago, Nellie was at the height of Australia's cabaret circuit in Third World, yet she was largely forgotten until the playwright and librettist Alana Valentine revived her story in the cabaret show Send for Nellie. This debuted at the Sydney Festival in January 2024.
I began researching Nellie's story in the early 1990s, and one of the first people I spoke to was Bobby Lim, who was still alive at that point. Now, he was a very famous television star of the 60s and 70s, and when I went to see him and I mentioned Nellie's name, he spoke about Nellie in absolutely glowing terms. He was the one who told me the phrase, "Send for Nellie." He said, if you put Nellie in a show, you couldn't go wrong.
Nellie, who was born in Australia, often talked about her Caribbean heritage. And yet, we know very little about who her people were, where they came from, and why they chose to come here.
It's just been an incredible journey trying to sift through the records about Nellie. And so I was quite excited because we don't hear so much about people from the Caribbean background in Australia. It's really shown me a side of our colonial history that is not well known, that, not everybody was a white convict here.
So how did Nellie Small, a Caribbean Australian woman, rise to become a household name in Australia? And why had she largely been forgotten? Drawing on my expertise as a historical novelist, I'll also go beyond what's available in public records to explore her inner life through fictional recreation. Imagining how she might have reflected on her life and her Caribbean ancestral roots. A kind of ghost Nellie, brought to life by the Jamaican-Australian actress Zara Newman.
When I was younger, if you told me I was going to be a nightclub entertainer, I would never have believed you. But thanks to my lucky stars, or more likely the conviction of my Catholic faith, against the odds, I not only managed to survive, but even thrive. Sometimes, that is. Perhaps it's because of my winning personality and my great big beaming smile. Or, on a good day, I think I might actually be talented.
Ladies and gentlemen, the show is about to commence. Please move into the theatre and take your seats.
Nellie Small was born in Sydney in 1900 and was brought up by her mother, Ellen Rose Small. She was educated by the Sisters of the Good Samaritan in working-class Balmain. By 13, she was living and teaching at the Mater Convent, even though that's when most children during that period would have left school. At 16, Nellie started working in a factory before moving on to domestic work, the only other work she thought was open to her.
Working in a factory? It was a lot freer and easier than convent life, let me tell you. But after spending time preserving peaches and making mats, I'd had enough of that and did what colored girls do, went into domestic service. I never once thought of becoming a theatrical performer. I only went to Her Majesty's Theatre to support my girlfriend who was auditioning for a part in Cairo. Even though I protested, but I can't act. I was offered £3 a week to just walk across the stage. I couldn't believe it.
It seems like fate stepped in and a new world opened up for Nellie. I asked Alana, when did her acting career start?
She started her professional career in the theatre in probably sometime in the 20s, I think 1924, because that's when the Tivoli was, happening. And she was participating in a number of performances curated by Queenie Paul. She played a mammy in one and she played a cabin boy in another. And then in 1931, a little place on Oxford Street called Clay's Variety advertised for unusual acts. And Nellie, in an interview later, said, I didn't think of myself as in any way exotic or unusual, but people said to me that my colour was.
Well, now, how did you start in show business originally? Weren't you with dear old Mike Connors and Queenie Paul?
Yes, well, prior to joining that company, I won an amateur trial at a little theatre in Oxford Street. We used to call it Clay's Variety. At that time, Clay's, Fuller's, they had the theatre tied up. And I started there. Old Clay had died in the meantime. So I went to Connors and Paul and got a job with them. I stayed with them for 7 weeks. And then that was one of the few times I wore a frock in a production. I was singing Am I Blue, and Queenie got the idea that she should dress me up as a mammy. So away I went. Bandana around the head and a basket of cotton on the stage. I was told that they put on novelties, and I couldn't see that I was a novelty, but it was pointed out to me that my colour was.
People said to me that my colour was. And I love the way Nellie puts that too. She doesn't say I was, she says people told me I was. And even from the beginning, she's sort of asserting her ability to control how she's seen, which I really loved.
I never think of myself as being exotic or unusual in any way. But people see me like that. And then I realize what they're looking at. They're putting me in some kind of box with my fuzzy-wuzzy hair, chocolate-colored skin. A box that not only constrains me but makes me feel like I have to justify myself. Justify my place in the world. Continuously prove I'm worthy of respect. Isn't striving to be good at what I do enough?
This Saturday, lyric audiences had a fresh vaudeville program presented to them by Queenie Paul and Mike Connors, featuring Nellie Small and many other artists. June 1934, The Sun.
Queenie Paul seems to have had a huge impact on Nellie's career. Could you tell us a little bit about her?
Queenie Paul was actually called Pauline Paul. She was a vaudeville artist and she was a producer and an entrepreneur. She was born in Piedmont. And from the age of about 15, she was on stage with Stiffy and Moe, who are very well-known vaudeville stars. In 1917, she met an American performer called Mike Connors, and they married later that year in Newcastle, so it must have been a whirlwind romance. And they started this theatre called Con Paul Theatres, and were what today we would see as some sort of celebrity power couple that know what it takes because they've been there themselves. And I have got a lot of respect for Queenie in that, yeah, she went from being this tall, beautiful blonde who would have attracted attention for that to being a real entrepreneur and an entertainment visionary.
Throughout the Depression years, Nellie continued to perform. But in between gigs, she still had to make ends meet.
The Depression years? Sure, they were tough. But me and my mum, we were luckier than most. Always managed to keep myself and her off the dole. In between the glamour and glitz of performing in shows, there I'd be on my hands and knees, cleaning someone else's house. I didn't like that at all. But I tell you what, I believe it humbles us, puts fire back in our blood, makes us more grateful for the times when life showers us with blessings.
Partnering with her mum, Ellen Rose, who she was living with at the time, she turned to her entrepreneurial skills to find ways to bring in the cash and to help pay the rent.
Nellie, being very fond of reading, started the Palm Library because she lived near Palmer Street. She scraped together all her reading matter and, with as many as a suitcase could hold, she called round to friends, flats and boarding houses and was welcomed as if she were a cheque from Mr. Whiddon. If you go to 11 Chapel Street, Nellie's mother will find you something juicy, romantic or melodramatic for a shilling deposit and threepence a book. Reported in The Arrow, Friday the 15th of January, 1932.
It was fascinating to discover that during the Depression, with the White Australia policy in full swing, these two black women created their own lending library and formed something of a community hub in Darlinghurst, just east of central Sydney. In the meantime, though, Nellie continued to forge on with her career.
Tonight, at the Masonic Hall, the Jelly Nuts will present a change of program. New artists appearing are Miss Nellie Small, Australia's only coloured male impersonator who has just completed a long season at the Majestic Theatre, Adelaide. October 1937, the National Advocate.
And she was starting to forge a reputation for male impersonation, something we'll come back to. She also was on the stage with some of the era's biggest actors, like Oscar Ashe.
Well, I was in the same theatre I'm in now 30 years ago with Oscar Ashe in Choo Chin Chow. Then I came back to Adelaide again, right slap bang into the middle of the centenary at Christmas 36. And I left here again in March 37. I was with Stud Foley at the Majestic at that time. And the weather was just as hot and we were doing 2 shows a day.
And was business just as good?
Just as good.
All through the 30s, she works in variety and vaudeville. So that's at the height of the Depression. And then, of course, the Second World War happens. Yeah. But there was a place set up in Surrey Hills. It's called the Booker T. Washington Club because African-American servicemen were not allowed to fraternise with non-African-American servicemen. So there was this special place for them and they used to invite First Nations women and white women to go there. Sometimes Jimmy Somerville and the Port Jackson Jazz Band did play there. So Nellie was headlined there. Then once the war was over, she became a really big star by then. Like in the 50s, she was headlining at Sammy Lee's in Woollahra. Now, a headliner is the person who is sort of like, she's like the Adele or the Pink or the Taylor Swift.
She's the star.
Yeah, she's the star. That's right. And everybody comes for her and then there's a whole range of sort of variety acts that happen.
Yeah, and Alana, why was it significant that she headlined at Sammy Lee's?
To be the headliner at one of Sammy Lee's clubs was to have really made it. if you're at the top of the bill, you're attracting the business and people who came in and they wanted to have their photo taken with Nellie because she was the headliner. So that was an incredible endorsement of Nellie's monetary value, but also her status as an artist.
Sammy Lee was clearly an important figure in the cabaret scene. Can you tell us more about him?
He was actually born in Canada. And in 1937, he toured Australia and he started living in Potts Point. And then in 1947, he opened Sammy Lee's in Oxford Street, Wallara. And you can actually still see that building there on Oxford Street. It's got the frontage there. They haven't pulled it down. It was the kind of Viper Room of its time. It was the Studio 54, it was where all the celebrities, all the cool people went. And Nellie headlined there.
I look in your eyes and I realize it's the end of the affair.
And being nurtured, being promoted, being endorsed by him would have just been a wonderful thing for her. But we can't be naive about what it must have been like to be in the nightclubs of those times. I don't think that they were particularly gentle places. I think there was a gangland shooting at one of Sammy's clubs. So if you're going to attract the stars, the high life, the celebrities, you also inevitably sometimes attract the low life and the not so salubrious elements. But yeah, to have Sammy's confidence is what makes me say that Nellie was one of the biggest stars of her era. Very few people have such a long career and just continue to become a bigger and bigger star.
Those of us in the entertainment industry realise that you are one of the pillars of Australian show business. You have been in it continuously now for about 30 years. But how is it that you keep going in between the times when theatres have had these dull periods and so on?
Well, I concentrated on nightclubs then, you see, because they do provide a continuity of work.
Yes. Well, then I would say that this idea that we're usually given in magazines and pictures and so on, that nightclubs hang on one personality entertainer, is more or less correct.
Quite correct.
Mm-hmm.
So they more or less build a show around it. They bring new acts in like every program, which is usually about 5 weeks duration. All the other acts come in there, but you're always the mainstay, or the cornerstone, I should say, of the show. As a matter of fact, I had 4.5 years with Sammy Lee.
In the big nightclub in Sammy's?
Sydney.
In Sydney.
Sammy Lee's in Sydney, and I think that's a bit of a record, you know.
It's the end of the affair.
Turn left.
I was excited to learn that Alana's cabaret show, Sen for Nellie, was having a second run in Wollongong. She invited me along and I jumped at the chance to see Nellie reincarnated back on the stage in the world of theatre after months of exploring her story.
For about 37 kilometres, continue straight on.
So I headed down the freeway with my co-producer, Ben Etherington.
So, Sienna, where are we?
Hey, Ben, we made it. And we're just about to go in and see Sen for Nellie. And it's fantastic. It's crowded. There's lots of people. They've got the top hats at the door, as Nellie would have done. And yeah, I'm kind of feeling like her spirit's here with us. And we're... Oh, there's the bell. It was wonderful to see Nellie back on the stage after an absence of over 60 years. After the show, we caught up with Eleanor Rockabaro, who played the role of Nellie. It'd be really nice to ask you, how are you feeling playing Nellie?
Very relieved was probably the first word, but also encouraged that I get this opportunity to tell her story. It's big shoes to fill, let me tell you.
Tonight, I was really moved. And you were brilliant. And I saw Nellie. I saw her there in you and standing with you. And, I don't know what you think about this, but in terms of ancestors, when we inhabit someone else, even though it was 100 years ago, that energy from then is coming through you. I don't know if you relate to that.
Oh, I can wholeheartedly relate to that. And I often feel that Nellie lands within me when the lights hit me and I'm there, and I have no choice but to just allow her to take over. And sometimes that can be very daunting, but I'm reminded that I am simply a vessel telling her story, not mine. Sometimes that balance is blurred. Yeah.
I really felt Nellie's spirit in Eleanor's performance, and I continued to sense her presence as the cast and crew celebrated opening night in the lobby, because Nellie was looking down on us from massive black and white photos of her hanging up on all the walls. Lana was there, and I asked her about them.
Yes, so there's a foyer display at Wollongong, and the photographs are from the State Library of New South Wales collection. There are these amazing photos of Nellie. One of my favourites is Nellie just walking along Martin Place. She's walking along George Street, and she's just in this crowd of people who are going about their business in the same way. I really love the confidence of Nellie in those photos.
For me, I see a singular woman, yes, with confidence, a quiet confidence, but she's very isolated, not just because she's a woman, but also because of the colour of her skin. And the words keep coming to me, my black skin protects me in all of this whiteness. She cloaks herself in some kind of confidence and some kind of strength as she walks.
She was very staunch about speaking out about things, and she also used to say, "Stop behaving like that or I'll give you a black look." So she had these great comebacks, taking the sort of racism of that and turning it back on people, which is great, so yeah.
And so, looking at that photograph, I see the inner strength Nellie had to project, a kind of confidence that I've had to present when I walk into a room and look around and realise, oh, yet again, there's only one of me. And yes, actually, I do belong here. So from now on, I'm going to say what Nellie said.
Come, sit by me. We don't eat people anymore.
Queen G, who was my co-curator on this work, what we wanted to talk about was how she became really acclaimed as a person of colour on stage and included and beloved of the Australian people, and yet how off stage she still had extremely difficult experiences. She could go from the night being cheered and clapped and applauded and then not be allowed to stay at that same hotel or something, or have to go into a different entrance. Jimmy Somerville, who I interviewed in 1991, he told me that when they were touring the Outback as the Port Jackson Jazz Band, Nellie was not allowed into the Brisbane Post Office to pick up her own mail. Just that feet in two worlds constantly. Constantly, yeah.
Yes.
I love performing, and when I am, my world is filled with light. If only I also didn't have to live with the darkness of hypocrisy. Some days I simply don't have the strength. When I'm up on stage and look out into the audience, I see eyes filled with wonder, admiration, sometimes even desire. But the next day, when it's over, those very same eyes, they look down on me. Eyes often filled with envy, with fear that can simmer into hate. To me, it's a reflection of how they see themselves. Their hearts shriveled by how they've been taught to divide up the world, fanning the misconception that they are superior.
When crinkly-haired Nellie reached Rose Bay Airport from a New Zealand tour, immigration officials refused to accept her explanation that she is an Australian citizen. They insisted she fill in a visitor's permit and threatened to send her back to Auckland unless she signed it. Nellie has been back in her homeland a week, but she still hasn't heard from the Immigration Department acknowledging its hasty mistake. Daily Telegraph, 13th of September, 1953.
As people of colour know too well, racial profiling is still routine at Australia's borders, and we become used to images of asylum seekers being turned away. I shouldn't be shocked, but it's still confronting to learn that Nellie, even though she hadn't done anything wrong, was denied entry to the country in which she was born. I mean, imagine arriving back tired after a very successful tour, looking forward to sleeping in your own bed, and you're threatened with deportation. To get my head around this, I spoke to historian Cassandra Pybus about race and identity in Australia in the 1950s.
Well, you can't underestimate the mindset that comes with the Cold War, the 50s. You've got this isolated white country in the middle of the ocean, the incredible pressure to conform to a particular kind of very middle-class white-coded sense of what Australia was and what made it great. But in the 50s, this was like the dominant cultural pattern. I know about it because I grew up in it.
And so for somebody like Nellie?
Well, we wouldn't expect somebody who looks like her to be an Australian citizen. That's the problem, that Australian citizens by the turn of the century are coded white. In reality, they're not, but they're coded white. And that, I think, has really skewed the whole kind of conception of how racism works in Australia. It becomes much more racist as we move into the 20th century. And so what the White Australia policy has done is give people license to say, you are the other, you are not us, along with the long, well-established dehumanisation of the Indigenous community. And so we are a deeply racist society. We are. And so it's not surprising to me that Nellie would have encountered this.
And now, of course, you wear male attire all the time. There's a good reason for that, isn't there, Nellie?
Well, there is actually, because when I was in Melbourne for Connors and Paul, 32.3, I'd go out and do my show and I'd be in male attire on the stage. I'd be in my own clothes in the street, and people couldn't reconcile the two people, you see. So Queenie Paul suggested I wear male attire, and I was a bit nervous about it because of laws and things.
Yes.
So I said, oh, well, I'll try it. Well, I tried it for a week. My goodness me. Every time you stopped at the corner for the lights or you're looking in a shop window, there's Nellie Small, the Dixie girl.
Alana, you spoke earlier about being drawn to Nellie because she spoke to your queerness. Can you unpack that a little for me? I mean, how did you even encounter Nellie in the first place?
My grandparents grew up in Redfern, on Redfern Street, and my grandmother would walk us around the city. She would tell me about her misspent youth in the clubs of the city, and she mentioned Nellie Small to me. Now, at that time, when I was 8 and 9 and 10, I hated the walking around. I hated hearing the stories. This was, the sort of boring old stuff that old people talk about, of course. I had no interest in it. But that's how oral history actually works. It gets inculcated in you even when you don't even realise that it's sort of going in. So sort of fast forward a few years, and I'd written a play for the Australian Theatre for Young People, and then I was looking to what would be my next play, and I thought about Nellie Small. And I guess that my nascent, I would even say my burgeoning queerness, took one look at Nellie Small cross-dressed as a man and thought, well, if Nellie can be a part of the theatre, maybe I can be too.
Nellie's move to wearing men's clothing, both on and off stage, seems different to stars like Katharine Hepburn or Marlene Dietrich. For Nellie, I believe it was more than pushing boundaries of style, female liberation, or self-expression. I get the sense that for her, it was a sign of who she actually felt she was, a way of reconciling her interior sense of self to how she was seen on the outside. Alana told me a fascinating anecdote that gives us a little more insight.
I was very excited when we were putting the cabaret together that Helen Pitt from the Sydney Morning Herald did a feature article about Nellie, and there were comments under the article. The woman called Jo Chandrayanis said Nellie used to rent the place next to their backyard, and she told me this wonderful thing. She said she used to see men's underwear hung on the back line, and I loved that detail because that really does push Nellie from just dressing externally as a man to actually wearing male underwear. That's very interesting.
Yeah, that's right. So we get both sides. We get Nellie as a wonderful performer up on stage doing her thing, but then also this amazing woman, what I would consider transgender. Is that what you would call her?
I call her gender non-conforming. I know it's a much more general thing, but I just feel like that actually embraces sort of a historical reality as well as a present. But, like we were talking about before, Nellie has all these amazing facets to her diamond, and people will claim different parts of her, yeah.
Alana, what about Nellie and Edith Meggitt? There seems to have been a lot of articles about the relationship in the press.
Yes, there was lots of feature stories about her relationship with Edith Meggitt. She lived with Edith for 20 years in North Sydney and Edith's furrier husband, and Edith became ostensibly her manager. Whatever the nature of that relationship, it was intimate, it was close, it was loving, all of those wonderful things. So I felt that it deserved to be in the cabaret. Yeah, I have the meeting in a church because in that article Nellie talks about her religious faith. I just wanted to, in the work, acknowledge that Nellie relied on things and people, and her faith was a big part of her.
Edith Meggitt, friend, confidant, lifesaver. She was not only my manager, she guided me, supported me, helped shape my career. Yes, sure, I've heard the gossip. Me living with her and her husband. What of it? Life's too short to bother with all that foolishness. You only have one life, which means you only have one option, to live it the way you choose.
We've explored Nellie's life and career in depth, but something's still missing, and it's what sparked my interest in the first place. Nellie's connection back to her roots in the Caribbean, roots that connect her story to mine. Throughout this episode, we've heard excerpts from an interview Nellie did with Ron Sullivan on Radio Adelaide in 1954. In that interview, Sullivan asked her about her ancestry.
Although you're an Australian, I think you're West Indian extraction, is that right?
Yes, I'm rather proud of that. My grandfather belonged to Barbados, and my great-grandfather came from Antigua.
Well, in that case, the West Indian people are pretty proud of their British connections too, aren't they?
Particularly Barbados, because it's been under the British flag for 327 years, and even their customs police, they dress in the same style as Nelson's sailors.
Yeah,
Yes, and when after the...
In that interview, Nellie spoke about her pride in her West Indian heritage, but little is known about her forebears. We don't know when they arrived. We don't know the circumstances in which they arrived. In fact, no one seems to have confirmed Nellie's oral account of them being Caribbean. To get some professional guidance, I got in touch with the Society of Australian Genealogists and was introduced to Vanessa Cassin, the education manager. She very generously offered to take a deep dive into Nellie's Caribbean lineage. She then spent weeks poring through the historical records, but with no luck. I was starting to lose hope of getting anywhere when Vanessa finally got in touch to let me know she had some exciting news to share with me.
Nellie has actually been a really interesting journey because we don't hear so much about people from the Caribbean background in Australia. So I was quite excited when you sort of said you'd love to find out more about her background and try and prove that she did have West Indian heritage. But her mother's family has proved to be exactly what Nellie said in all those newspaper articles. Long colonial roots in Australia back to the mid-1850s. Nellie's mother was born in Sydney in 1881 and her name was Ellen Rose Small. the information she'd given on Nellie's birth certificate was accurate. She was about 18 years old when she had Nellie. And here's the bingo moment for you.
Hey, I'm waiting for it.
Ellen Rose Small's father was James Thomas Small, and he was born in Barbados. So that was the first big one. And we actually then, once we had names, and her mother's name was Eliza Buckley, we were able to search for articles about them in the digitised newspapers.
So Nellie's grandfather is James Thomas Small, and he's from Barbados, and her grandmother's name is Eliza Buckley. What's her story?
Eliza Buckley was born in 1857, so we're getting back to the very early days here. Sadly, it looks like their marriage broke down fairly quickly, and I think Ellen Rose was their only child. But there were articles describing James Thomas Small as being African in appearance, being of dark skin. So we're like, okay, that definitely ties in with him being born in Barbados. But there was one article in particular that then indicated that his wife, Eliza Buckley, was also African in appearance, or they actually used the terms from the same dark continent, which is very dated language that we wouldn't use these days.
No, we certainly wouldn't. But this is fascinating because does it mean that Eliza Buckley, Nellie's great-grandmother, could also have Caribbean heritage?
Her father was called William Buckley and her mother was called Ellen Higgins, and she was Irish.
So Ellen Higgins, she's the start of the female line, the Catholic side. And what about the male side?
You always come across this point in family history research where you're almost like, I give up. Right at the end.
Of course, it's always at the end.
Always at the end.
Always at the end. Just before your eyes have given up, your heart's given up, something happens.
Yep. We've actually found a crew list from a ship called the Lady Warncliffe, and it has a cook and seaman on board called William Buckley that arrived in Sydney in 1855, 1 year before Ellen and William Buckley got married. William Buckley was born in Antigua. So we now have at least 2 lines in Nellie's family that are from the West Indies. So that brought all those little breadcrumbs together.
So by the time we get down to Ellen Rose Small, Nellie's mother, she would be a mixture of a Barbadian and also a half Irish, half Antiguan person. And what about Nellie's father? Do you know anything about him, Vanessa?
We have a name that Edith Megget believed was her father because she was the person that reported Nellie's death to the Registry of Deaths, and she gave the name Thomas Burns and said he was a sailor. And it's quite possible that he was just here on a ship in port for a week or two. So we've got a name but nothing much else about her father. He could well be a West Indian as well, particularly if he was a sailor. They came from all over the world. I mean, Sydney was a huge bustling port in 1899, 1900. And he may well have gravitated towards the West Indian community in Sydney while he was here.
In interviews, Nellie said that her father, like her maternal grandfather, came from Barbados. And who knows? Maybe their families knew of each other. Perhaps Thomas Burns was told to make contact with the Small family on his arrival in Australia. I realise this is speculation, but regardless, now thanks to Vanessa, we have archival sources to match Nellie's oral history. Earlier, I spoke to Cassandra Pybus about the social context that Nellie navigated in the middle of the 20th century. On discovering that her ancestors were here a full century earlier, I wanted to hear a little about the Australia that they might have encountered. I asked her whether it was unusual for Black West Indians to be arriving at this time.
I think that the White Australia policy, which comes so much later, has skewed the way in which Australians think about their colonial past. They don't see it as a multiracial society, but it was. In Tasmania, for example, the wife of the Chief Justice in the 1830s was a woman of colour from the Caribbean.
And what about the period when Nellie's ancestors arrived in the 1850s?
A lot of Caribbean sailors are part of the merchant fleet, part of the Navy fleet, and they come to a society that's full of gold fever. And it is also a society where they're not going to be knocked on the head and taken off to the slave market. And it's a society where they anticipate it's going to be kinder to them than the society that they come from. And so a lot jump ship here. And it makes every sense that they hang out together. They find one another and hang out together because they come from a very distinctive culture. And we see it today.
Unlike many of the stories I've discovered of Caribbean people migrating here, Nellie's Caribbean ancestors actually met in Australia. So she's from a multi-generational Caribbean-Australian family. And this, to me, does point to the existence of a black community in colonial times, in which Caribbean migrants met, came together, fell in love, and established families.
A gracious lady of Australian theatre and Australian stage. 2 years ago, much to the consternation of all of us in show business, taken very ill. A matter of about 1 month ago, she came back to show business to make her debut on ATN Sydney Tonight. Oh, wonderful to have you back in harness again, Nellie. How you been feeling?
Well, up and down.
Up and down.
Light and shade. Light and shade. Light and shade. Light and shade.
Alana, how could we have forgotten about Nellie? I mean, you're talking the 1950s and 60s, which is not that long ago.
I got asked that a lot. Why have we forgotten her? And my answer really was because people in positions of power are not her and don't identify as her and therefore can't see her in history. You're doing this podcast and you see Nellie and you think about what her experience was, and so you see her. You know, like I said, my queer experience, I see her, but also I think that we undervalue Australian history in all of our cultural product. It takes people who are in positions of power to see what that kind of achievement was. My experience is that audiences are often a long way ahead of some of those gatekeepers, but that's a whole nother podcast, really.
Can you tell us about Nellie's final years?
Most Australian musicians and performers do live hand to mouth. They very rarely have savings. So when Nellie wasn't working, she wasn't earning. So I can imagine that her last years were very, very, very difficult, that she relied on the kindness of people who did remember her. Carol Hayes said that she had a letter written by Nellie to her father, whose name was Jack Crotty, and he was a very famous trumpet player. So this is the letter. Edgewater Avenue,
Greenpoint, Gosford, 29th of the 11th, 1966. Dear Jack, many thanks for your thoughtfulness in visiting me at the hospital. It does you good to be remembered. After spending 3 months there, they let me come home. I have to go for a checkup on the 1st of the 12th, 66, so I'm taking this opportunity of returning your flask and smacking my lips at the thought of the marvellous soup it contained. Once again, thank you. And remember me to Frank and the rest of the boys who know me.
Very sincerely, Nellie Small.
Nellie Small.
How lovely to hear that letter.
It's great, isn't it? It was just amazing, these people who were so generous to draw me in and say, yes, Nellie was a big part of our community.
And so, how old was Nellie when she died?
When I interviewed Bobby Lim back in 1991, he told me that Nellie had a throat condition called sarcoidosis, which is not unlike emphysema. She was a very heavy smoker, as many people in those years were. So she died at the age of 68.
The years of the affair. It's the end of the affair.
The funeral of the late Nellie Small, formerly of Blues Point, will be held at the Church of St. Francis Xavier, and at the conclusion of the Requiem Mass commencing at 9:30, all will then proceed to the Northern Suburbs Cemetery for the burial. Members of the public are welcome.
But yeah, we've just arrived at the Macquarie Park Cemetery, and we're going to see if we can find Nellie Small's grave. It's a huge cemetery,
You just see an absolute sea of gravestones, and somewhere amongst these many headstones will be that of Nellie Small.
Yeah. We were lucky enough to talk to somebody in administration, and they explained to us that, in fact, it was Nellie that bought the grave for her mum, who died in 1955, and then when she died in 1968, she was also buried in the same plot with her mother. And that makes me feel really good to know that.
Yeah, it is very touching. So it's U12, isn't it?
It's U12, and it's grave number 6, I believe. Yes, so this must be U12.
Oh, wow.
That's amazing. It's not even flat. It's like there's a huge hole there. It's like there's nothing. I'm so shocked. Right now I'm looking at a plot of land, some grass with big holes.
I mean, there are quite a few grave sites around here that are empty, but this one looks particularly unkempt
and there's no recognition that she's here. Absolutely nothing. It was uplifting when we visited boxer Peter Jackson's immense gravestone in Brisbane. It showed us how revered he was in his time. We just couldn't leave Nellie's gravesite like this. Ben remembered a florist next to the administration building. So Ben and I are going to actually now go and place some flowers on her grave, just to give it a little bit of reverence, to mark it out, and to let Nellie's spirit know that we're thinking of her. We've got red for Rose Williams. That was her mother's name, Ellen Rose Williams. And we've got yellow for Nellie.
Oh, that looks beautiful, Sienna.
That's fabulous. It lifts my heart. As we stood back and reflected on Nellie and her mother, their bodies and spirits intertwined, Ben and I also contemplated their Caribbean ancestors.
Discovering what you have about Nellie and her ancestry, what does that make you think about Caribbean Australian experiences more broadly?
It's fascinating, isn't it, that certainly from my perspective, I've always thought about where do I want to end up? And I think where you end up is kind of indicative of where your home is. And so for the people that we've been looking at, for the Caribbean Australians that we've been exploring, I think they've all ended up in Australia. So ultimately, this is their home. I think there's always still a bit of a tinge of sadness around it, though, because your bones are not resting in the land that you were birthed into. And I think that as a migrant, you always have that pull. You always sort of feel you could have both worlds, that your bones could be in both places, so that you could kind of mingle the ancestries together.
I'm proud to be an Australian, to be part of the British Empire, but equally proud of my West Indian Caribbean ancestry. Two sides like two peas in the one pod. But when I need strength, it's my Caribbean roots that I turn to. Then I feel the echo of my ancestral spirits come and surround me, clothe me in protection, remind me that our lineage goes way back before colonization, back to a time when we all celebrated belonging to the circle of one.
There's no freedom with no fighting. We on the road to righteousness. There's no freedom with no fighting. We on the road to nothingness. There's no freedom with no fighting. We on the road to righteousness. There's no freedom with no fighting.